Welcome one, welcome all to ESPN Esports. This is Search and Destroy, our weekly ESPN Esports Call of Duty League program every single Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Twitch, on Twitter, YouTube, and the ESPN app. We have world champions, and we have so much more to discuss. It has been a roller coaster ride these last few days, and as you can see, the consensus greatest Call of Duty League player of all time is joining us right now. Ask anybody who the best COD competitive player is. He will say the person below us right now on screen. Ian Crimsix Porter has cemented his legacy with his third world championship, the Dallas Empire, getting it done this past weekend. And then there's a lot more to unpack after that. But let's start with the world championships, E6.
How's it going, guys?
How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's a relaxing. It's not really relaxing, but I mean, we're just. I guess you could say we're just tired from all the time and effort that we put in the last at least month. So it's just kind of weird, not really having anything to do other than a bunch of interviews and just hanging out. So it's been good, but obviously with the news on Monday, it's tough. It's tough too.
Well, take us back to, I mean, we've heard a lot of things in terms of when people first started hearing about 4v4, how teams were digesting it. Like, when was the first time you actually heard about this?
About a month and a half ago. And yeah, I think it was decided like a month and a half ago. And a lot of owners didn't, relay that information to their players for obvious reasons. But I don't know why they shouldn't have had that vote that early, because there's no way to keep something like that a secret. And, obviously it's going to affect players. It's going to affect teams. And, it's at the end of the day, it sucked. It sucked that I would rather have it come out of nowhere than have it happen, the way it did. So it's just that premeditated thought of, what's going to happen next year. Even though, the biggest job, our biggest tournament was still yet to come for this current year. So that's honestly what everyone was thinking, I would say, the month leading up into champs.
So you guys knew about it. We've heard from Clay and other people, but how did do you know when exactly the vote took place and who voted on it? Was it just team ownership?
Well, yeah, it was. I mean, again, I remember tweeting it out, right? And it's how you define like voting. It wasn't like everyone got together and like as a group. I mean, this is all to my understanding. It wasn't like everyone got together and was like, yeah, let's raise your hand if you're on 5v5, raise your hand if you're on 4v4. I don't think it was like that. I think it was like each owner was contacted or organization was contacted and was pretty much like, which one do you prefer and give me your reasons why. And it was like it was probably phrased as like a prefer, not like a, hey, we're making a change next year. Like, what do you think about this? It probably wasn't done like that, but I bet you the overwhelming majority was one of the reasons why it probably went 4v4. So, or at least made them seriously consider changing. So.
Okay.
So this was a month and a half out. You still have playoffs to worry about. You still have a season to worry about. Like, take me through even the initial reactions. Like, did you talk to the team about this? Did you push it to the side? How did you handle it?
So I found out and immediately told my team, because I knew that out of any team in the league that we were most like a team, like we were most like a unit. And just knowing the personalities and, the character or the characteristics of everyone on the team, that we'd probably be able to handle this information better than any team in the league. So, it was obviously, I mean, when I heard it first, I was like, damn, that sucks, And at the end of the day, like, the game does play 4v4 better.
Mhm.
Now, if you were to ask me like on a game like Black Ops 4, like those maps were not, in my opinion, were probably not even playable 4v4. But I'm really hoping that the next game has maps catered to 4v4 and not 5v5, so a little bit smaller, a little bit more condensed. And I think that will really determine whether the gameplay is better or not. Because, like, honestly, you look at maps like on Call of Duty Ghost, and I think a lot of people probably haven't even considered this, but that game probably would have played better 5v5. I mean, there's just huge open lanes. There was just it like a game like that felt like there was a lot of space on the map. And I mean that's just my opinion. So I really think that it's going to come down to the overall maps in terms of what is going to play better 4v4 or 5v5. So
Do you know how? Because like one thing that, and again, COD is incredibly unique with this because not
Yeah.
only do you have to deal with one developer, but you have to deal with several, and they
Mhm.
all communicate with players and ownership completely differently. Sometimes not at all. But I think
Yeah.
what I was wondering is how much like communication do you think happened between, or has happened, if you know, between Treyarch and the actual league or Treyarch and players?
Probably a lot.
Okay.
I would say probably a lot. I don't know for certain. But it had to have. It was probably Treyarch that proposed, like, hey, we got small maps. Do you want to do 4v? Do you want to see if they want to do 4v4? And I mean the fans have been asking for it. I think that everyone's wanted 4v4, like especially, and I mean think about from like a casting standpoint, it's definitely a lot easier to cast. There's just like less chaos on the map when there's one less player. From like setting up events, there's one less setup. There's one less, and while that might be fine for the main stage or like the Bravo stage, the backup main stage, it comes into play when you're setting up like the Challenger series, the AM brackets. You're literally you're going you're taking off like what 20% of whatever you're setting up. So it's definitely easier in almost every single regard. And I mean, yeah, it makes sense, but in a way, like you just look at, to me, it's just like you look at all the other esports, like no one's doing 4v4 except for what, like Halo, I think. But in all the other esports, everyone's doing 5v5. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough decision no matter what. But ultimately, I think it comes down to maps and how the game plays out. All I know is that I hope that if Treyarch's on board with 4v4, if the league's on board with 4v4, then the game after this game is still in that direction, because this like changing and switching has got to stop. It's just not fair to like us as players and me as a player. It's like I would prefer to just stay on the same format in that regard every single year. But yeah, I just hope that everybody's on the same page, that if we're going 4v4, we're staying 4v4. And if there's a switch like this, back to 5v5, like I mean, it could happen at this point. We played 2 years, only 2 years 5v5. Mm-hmm. So it's I don't know. It's interesting.
Even before we talk about how we got to the situation with Clay leaving the Dallas Empire, there are now 12 less starting spots across the league. And we're already hearing news. Some players are leaving their teams. Players like JCap are retiring. We're already starting to hear this kind of news, right? Like, what do you think the offseason is going to look like, Krim?
Well, do you guys, is the free agency period public?
As far as I know, it's the
The 13th or the
13th, I
14th?
think, to do.
I think it's like this until the 6th to exercise the option, and then a week after that. Yeah.
They made it.
Okay.
They made it
Hopefully
public.
you guys aren't like testing me right now, but yeah.
No.
Yeah, okay.
We're not.
It's,
This is not a gotcha question. I'm very curious.
Our job is we're not trying to set you up to like.
Okay.
No. We're not. This is not a gotcha question.
Yeah, but I mean, hopefully everyone gets their teams. Like ultimately, I think the best thing from a player standpoint is to get all the teams handled as quickly as possible. You sign your new contracts so you can get paid during the off season because and that was one of the main reasons why we're like we need to form a players union because like we weren't actually signing 1-year deals. We were only signing one. It was either like a 9-month deal or like a like a 21-month deal because basically, if that option isn't exercised, you don't get on a team until Cold War starts, which an org can entirely do. It wouldn't make sense, but it's possible. You could literally be getting you wouldn't be getting a salary for like 3 months. And that was one of the main concerns, which is just everyone needs to sign or get on a team sooner rather than later. So you can just go back to the off season because, when we're playing for, 8-9 months straight, this year was a little bit shorter because we started later, but it's just healthier and, no one wants to go through 2 to 3 months worth of, you hear your phone ring and you're just like paranoid out of your mind. And, it's like there's moments in the roster change period and pros never really talk about this or people in other games, but it's one of the like sketchiest times to go through. And it's almost like you're afraid to go to sleep because you're afraid of waking up. You're like, oh, that like I just got my spot stolen or something like that. So that's why signing quickly is like probably the most, it just pleases everyone. Everyone wins. But yeah.
So that puts a lot of power especially in a franchise league, in the owner's hands. And you brought up the union word. I was going to, but I'm grateful that you brought it up. One of the things that I've always really appreciated about Call of Duty players, I think because a lot of you guys have had to do a lot on your own before there was even like an esports ecosystem or whatever. Yeah. You guys already have like, and I'm not going to get super in depth with GAs because they've like people have fluctuated incredibly on
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Except that 1 week where it showed up on the broadcast.
I will say one thing.
That is my go-to actually. That is my go-to actually. Anytime a fine or I mean, I haven't even gotten one. I don't even think they're actually like any fines going out about talking about GAs because of that one moment.
Nice.
Because it was on the broadcast, so I don't think they're even because everybody knows. Like everybody knows. Like you don't use certain things, and then that one moment is it's sort of like the saving grace for us as players. So shout out to CDL production. Thank you. But I mean, honestly, sorry to cut you off. This is a good topic though. Honestly, and I know Treyarch will be good at this, but in my opinion, if there was a quick method, and hopefully there is next year, of implementing like a change or like a GA into the like actual ban list quickly, then like none of this would even exist. So anyways.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up actually. It was kind of a side note. I was going to bring up GAs as a way that players developed this method of communication to deal with certain things in the game, right? Where you're like, we can't play this competitively. We're going to come together in an agreement. It's honestly the closest thing I've seen to a union organized by actual players in esports. I haven't seen anything from League of Legends, which was like the first game I covered really
I think
closely.
Counter-Strike has a union, right?
Yeah, Counter-Strike actually has a
Yeah,
union.
yeah.
So I think my main question to you is like, what is because COD pros seem to be pretty proactive when compared to a lot of other esports.
Yeah.
What is the main obstruction in your way in terms of actually forming a legitimate players union organized by the players themselves?
Probably the fact that we're all idiots. Not all idiots, but we're all, in Call of Duty, because a lot of people from different esports always say that about Call of Duty players, like just that they don't give a fuck. They know their worth. Like they know exactly, like it's almost like, and I mean, I've hung out with some Dota players. I know some Counter-Strike players. And I mean, there's plenty of people that will just, sign any contract put in front of them. And Call of Duty players are not like that. And I think one, it's probably because we're all from like North America and we also can communicate, uh, you know, stuff that's BS like quickly. Um, like for example, say there's a new term in everyone's contract that people aren't liking, and I can like tell all the other teams about that instantly and say make sure you do not do this. And I think that there's a couple people in the scene, and I'd like to think that I'm probably one of them, but if I see some like bogus in the contracts like that, like I bring it up and I report it and I tell everyone about it. um and I don't know, I've had times in my career where, there's been like blackmailing, like I've been used and abused in terms of like contracts with that in that regard. And I've just seen it happen left and right in almost so many different, esports, that it's just, for me, it just does not fly. And yeah, so the biggest, I mean, the biggest thing for the players union is that everyone's pretty hard-headed. Uh, but there was definitely some things that we didn't like, and so everybody knew, whether you dislike the player, you dislike the team, that like something needed to be done, because this was like especially after this year, um like something definitely needs to be done, because there's just no accountability.
Is this how much is this something that you want to help organize? It seems like you would logically be, if not the
Yeah.
figurehead of this, one of them, right? So how important is it for you to help establish this?
I would say it's important, obviously. But for me, it's like this can never come between me and my goals, my what I set out to do, what I want to do, like how I want to be remembered. Um, and for me, it's like this is the right thing to do. This is a good thing to do. Effort should be put into this, but it cannot conflict with my personal ambitions, or my team's ambitions, I should also say.
So now you've won 3. You have said, well, I guess I got to win 4 now. Like, how does it feel? You are in this rarefied air that people unequivocally now consider you to be the best at something. But it took this championship. I mean, many people would say that.
It's still debatable, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
anything is debatable,
Yeah.
but many people would say with this 3rd championship, based on the numbers alone,
Yeah.
that is a very high mountain to climb.
Yeah. I mean, I've always just had the like thinking method to like quickly forget. Irony, I know. Quickly forget tournaments. And like basically I'll have like, maybe a week, maybe a couple days where I just feel like on top of the world in that regard. But after that, it's back to work, and I completely, erase any sort of like post-championship thought in my mind, because I think that's the biggest I shouldn't say problem, but obstacle. The biggest obstacle to great players, good competitors, is yourself, and you can't really you can't improve if you already think you can't, like you're God's gift to the world. You can't. And I mean, like I'll have moments where I've been playing Call of Duty so long, I'll forget the fundamentals. And if I'm sitting here thinking I'm God's gift to Call of Duty, or the best player in the world, then I can if those fundamentals, if I randomly forget them, and I'm thinking that, like, I'm not going to be able to identify those mistakes and be able to do something about it. So that's just how I've been thinking. I I I don't know. It's almost weird, because maybe I don't think I'm in the best, and maybe that's why I'm staying so motivated for so long, because I feel like there's I don't want to set a limit to myself.
This year to previous years, I'm just wondering, because a lot of pros had difficulty with this past year. How
Yeah.
did you stay motivated? And I know, like, you've already brought up the fact that your team was actually a team and you guys really, really enjoyed like
Yeah.
teaming together.
Probably stayed motivated this year just because I've said this on stream a couple of times, and Modern Warfare had like 1,000 things wrong with it, 1,000 little tiny things wrong with it. And I think, if those, not even 1,000, say half of them get fixed, say 500 little things get fixed, then this game would have been, in my eyes, incredible. Like there's a lot of people, a lot of pros who just hated the game based solely off spawns, and like that's like an example of a little thing. So it's like when you add all those up, it's like really difficult to like a game. But personally, the previous year just sort of really, really ticked me off. I think maybe it was good timing that this was like that this was like the proving year. I was on Optic for so long, and people always thought, why is this guy on the team? Like, he's trash. He's just getting carried. And then maybe it was good timing in a sense that I was super motivated on a game that people disliked almost. But honestly, I think it's funny, because I think a lot of the people who actually enjoyed playing the game ended up placing well and placing better throughout the year. So but I mean, I don't know. It was definitely a weird year, because 10 out of 12 teams made the grand finals of tournaments. So I've never seen that before, but yeah, I don't know. I personally thought Modern Warfare wasn't as bad as people thought it to be. I thought the game engine was incredible. I thought that this game on like 30 hertz, so like pubs, literally felt better. It's like bullets would hit cleaner and hit better online than versus like the previous game on LAN. So that's just my opinion. You can say, that's BS or whatnot, but that's just how I feel. I feel like the game was actually could have been really good, but there's just so many things wrong with it. So
I have one question left. You've been very generous with your time, Krim. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
We
no
haven't even gotten to winning the world championship and parting ways with Clayster yet. And I do want to ask, because this is the question on everybody's minds, and we really don't have a definitive reason as to why it was Clay over any of the other teammates. So as much as you're willing to tell us, like, why Clay?
Well, it was always me or Clay, because it was like, put yourself in Stroh's shoes. It was basically, you decide between, not even Stroh's shoes, like the investors, the sponsors. You decide between, people who are extremely decorated, or do you decide between the future? Like the three young guns, Illy, Shotzi, and Hook, are essentially the future. So it was I mean, we've already had our internal talks, but to summarize it in that regard, that's what it came down to. And I mean, it sucked. Like it straight up sucked because like Clay played incredible like pretty much the whole year. And you know, I think every single one of us had, you know, moments or like for me, I had 1 month that I was just terrible. And, you know, everyone on the team had those moments where they were not at the top of the game or the top of their game. And there was no, someone said it best. It was like, whoever they decided to, you know, get rid of, it would have been the wrong decision because everyone brought something to the team. Everyone was different in their own right and different in good ways. So that's why everyone's so torn up about it, because it's just like, it is what it is. And the only, like, I can't even blame anyone. Even if it was like, if it was me and putting myself in Clay's shoes, like, I don't even know if I could blame them, because I'd be blaming the people who decided to make it 5v5 in the first place or make it 4v4 next year, because that's truly what, like, that's the only reason why this had to happen. So, because I truly think, like, if we kept going 5v5, obviously we wouldn't have made a change. And I think that we were just getting started, honestly.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate circumstance. Did you know that was when the announcement was going to come, like a day after you win the world title?
No. I trust me, I bitched about that one because that was absurd. It was honestly a joke. Because everyone sort of knew it already, but then that announcement like kicked everything into action. So whoever decided day after champs, I need to talk to you. All right.
Less than 20. Yeah, I was gonna say less than 24 hours.
Yeah,
Like you didn't even get to celebrate for 24 hours.
Yeah. Well, it's literally like you got to celebrate. Like me and Clay had some drinks, and Ray and Stro, and it's like you wake up hungover, and you see like, oh, it's 4v, like they already announced it. So it's like,
God.
I don't even know what to say.
I'm sorry. That's all I say.
The fact that you had to deal with that at your championship press conference, I think is quite unfair, to say the least.
Yep.
Last question for you to end this on a high note.
Okay.
Where does this championship win compare to your previous two?
I mean, it definitely, I would have to put it like as, even though it was more money, it was online. At the end of the day, like I'm man enough, you know, everyone out there is like, you know, making the online excuse is probably jumping for joy right now. But there's no greater feeling than winning a tournament like that with, you know, a whole bunch of people, like thousands of people watching. You know, it was great. It was awesome. There was just a little bit of glory, but there's like nothing compares to having an event in person.
Well, it was the most watched COD competitive event ever.
Was it?
According to the CDL, yeah, that's what they sent out a whole. They sent out a whole press release about how it was the most viewed event. Yeah, event. The most viewed event.
Yeah. Because I was about to say, I think Black Ops 2 Champs had like 500,000 viewers or something like that, like the finals, like way back in the day, or something crazy like that.
Well, nevertheless, you're still a 3-time world champion and the winningest player of all time, and you've been very gracious with your time. So thank you very much, Krim. We appreciate you being here on ESPN Esports.
Thank you, guys. See you guys later. What time is it? Oh, it's dinner time. It's dinner time.
So you get to get some dinner. Interviews, go eat, you know.
You're good. You can hang up here on Discord. We're going to continue on with the show. Thank you very much, Krim, for his time. And we're going to continue on here on Search and Destroy, our ESPN Esports Call of Duty League program. I swore I did receive an email. I'm actually going to pull it up right now because it was actually
I probably did too, and
I'm
just
pretty
didn't
certain
read it.
it's it was the most watched
That
Call
sounds
of Duty
terrible.
match ever. More than 330,000 peak viewership, Dallas versus Atlanta. This was an official email that CDL sent. So that is the case. Okay, so a lot to unpack there from Krim's interview. He was very open and honest. We even talked about unions and gentlemen's agreements, Emily. Do you think we'll see a union soon?
I mean, I hope so. I think what I got from Krim was that of all like player groups, I think there's definitely a want to have a union, and you have players who are really used to fighting for their own rights as much as they can. I also think, to his point though, when you brought up, you're like, whoa, it sounds like something that you could lead, et cetera, et cetera. He's like, that's going to unfortunately like directly conflict with my goals to continue as a player. So I think if we do get a player union, it would involve having someone who does not play anymore, probably a former player, someone that knows the scene really well, to be able to organize all of the players enough so that they're doing it from a slightly more outside perspective, so it's not directly impacting their own ability to negotiate with teams and stuff like that. And honestly, that's understandable. And that is like, I'm so happy that he's willing to talk about it. I'm so happy that like older veteran COD pros are willing to talk about it because, in some sports and esports, the U word is like completely dirty and will get you, like kind of blacklisted. So at the very least, I'm really happy that Krim always seems like someone who's willing to use his leverage to help other pros out in the scene, and at least get these conversations started when he feels like something is unfair. So that's always really good. And like, obviously he's not the only one. He's one of the more vocal players that does it, but there are a whole bunch of other players who have spoken out about this too. So hopefully that someone from outside the scene, hopefully a former pro, can, come in and step in and organize people, because I think the big problem here is that you have two decisions that both in a vacuum seem good, right? Return to 4v4. This is something that players and the community have wanted for a really long time. With smaller maps, 4v4 just plays a lot better. S&D specifically, I think, is a lot better on 4v4. And you have the decision not to expand, which, again, in a vacuum, I would have looked at and been like, okay, this is understandable. Overwatch League, in my opinion, expanded way too quickly in its second season. Like, they really overreached with how many teams they added. So I can understand both in a vacuum, but then either people didn't talk to each other, or when you add them up, what it really means is that they're cost cutting, because now they don't have to pay these 12 players that they now have to cut from rosters. And like, the saddest thing is with rosters like Dallas, like, A, they weren't even allowed to celebrate for more than 20, they celebrated less than 24 hours before the 4v4 announcement. And then B, there was nothing wrong with their roster. Like, I even wrote this before I knew 4v4 was definitely coming. I even wrote this in our championship roundup. I was like, this is just the beginning for this roster. They've built this really well, leveraging the strengths of their veterans with the strengths of their rookie and young players. This is the perfect roster setup. And now they're like, okay, we have to cut someone.
And then if you look at the roster, you got to, like, and actually, and I hate to say this, but Clayster makes sense. As silly as that sounds for somebody who's considered one of the top 5 best players of all time and is a 3-time world champion, if you look at the rest of the roster, Krim is considered number 1. So if it's going to be between Clay and Krim, simply based on history and statistics alone, Krim is probably going to win out from that regard. But then you look at the other 3, and you have Hook, who's been loyal to Team Envy for several years now, and he's still only 20 years old, so he's got a whole career ahead of him. And then you have Shotzi and Illy, who are also very young. Shotzi's the reigning MVP. Illy might have had iffy moments throughout the season, but definitely stepped it up in the postseason and also has a big future ahead of him. So unfortunately, like Krim said in the interview, that then lands on the two veterans. And which one do you and in talking with their coach Rambo Ray earlier today, they had to make a decision fairly fast. Like they basically, Ray said, I avoided this conversation until the very end of championships. And even then, I took a moment to celebrate. And then at the after party, essentially, is when they really began to dive into this, is what he said. Now, think about that. So they're starting the conversation not knowing. Yeah, right. They started that conversation, maybe like preliminary conversations, not knowing that hours later, the 4v4 announcement would happen. And then, of course, when that gets announced, how many of those players do you think are now going to be reaching out to Hastro and to Rambo and saying, am I in danger? Do I have a job? Like, that's like saying, hey, we're going to have job cuts at the company. Of course, if you're an employee there, you're going to get concerned. So this is like they made a decision very, very quickly. And not to say that the decision would have been different if they had more time to think about it, but they definitely didn't have as much time as they wanted to weigh out all angles, and still having gone to the decision they did, thinking that's the best case scenario. And in many ways it is, as unfortunate as it is.
Well, I also think that one of the, I guess, like, so first of all, the decision sucks. The fact they had to make it sucks. The fact that they made it so quick, had to make it so quickly also sucks. I will say that in a way, it's good that they made the decision so quickly, because now Clayster has as many options open to him as possible going into the off season, right? So at the very least, this is a situation where it's not like Clay is getting cut and no team has a chance to sign him. They're not, they're not holding on to any sort of option over his head or anything. Like, it's just like, okay, you now have as much time in the offseason as possible to find a team. So at the very least, like, again, low bar, but at the very least, there's that. And that's not even on, I'm not like blaming the Empire for anything here, by the way. This is not, it's just, it's a poop decision all around.
And it's
I have to
optically,
censor myself here.
yeah. Thanks. Optically, it's bad also because they're the champs and they're the first one to make a decision like this, Like, it's just an unfortunate series of events where they don't get to celebrate. They're the first ones to announce that they're dropping a player from their roster. We've heard a couple since now, or at least announcements, like J-Cap retiring, Jerd being released or separating right now. There's the whole confusion around the Marshall twins and what's going on there.
We're tracking their Twitter follows. Apparently they followed the Rocker
Who did they
GM
follow?
or something. Yeah, esports off seasons are always funny because everyone just pays attention to who follows who on Twitter.
Or which tweet did you like? Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, like, oh, okay.
You liked Slasher's tweet, did you? Okay, is that where you're going? Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so we haven't spent much time. I mean, we didn't. That felt like 10 minutes talking with Krim. There's so much to talk to him about. We didn't really even talk about the championship match itself and how dominant it was and how impressive Dallas looked.
Yeah, I mean, I expected this match to be a lot closer than it was. Like, I expected it to be really back and forth. But the thing I brought up before when I was just talking to you about this off camera for our written pieces on it is that when these two teams met, Atlanta had the head-to-head by like a pretty significant margin. But even in the 3-0s that they had, the individual matches tended to be pretty close, like the individual maps. And then additionally, Dallas tended to win when it like really, really mattered, like when there was something immediately on the line for them. So for example, they won the final, the grand finals, right, to get their second title in Chicago, I believe. And then they won in the upper bracket, and then they won again in grand finals in champs. And I also think this is kind of the end result of, to the point I made earlier, Dallas's roster building, where they were so stubborn, even when people were saying, like, when are Lily and Shotzi going to show up? Like, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure about this roster. Krim and Clay are washed, et cetera, et cetera. Like there was a lot of stuff going on about this at the very beginning of the season, just because that launch weekend really hung over their heads for some reason in the community mind. And they were so adamant when I talked to them in Los Angeles at their first win. They were like, this is our roster. Like, people need to shut up about this already. And this is a team that by the end of the season, I think really saw out that roster to as much of a potential as they could within the year that they had. But like, to the point we made starting off this segment after Krim left, like it's so frustrating that this roster, I think honestly, like I agree with Krim, they were just at the beginning of what we could have seen them do in 5v5. So that part really sucks.
Definitely does. They also, if you're looking at the statistics of Atlanta and Dallas, they mentioned it on the broadcast as well. Atlanta had the clear season record advantage against Dallas, but Dallas won more games when it mattered the most. Tournament victories in the postseason, and now including the grand final. And I asked Ray that, like, what was it about those games that made it different? And he said, we just knew. Like he said that Dallas plays better against Atlanta when their backs are against the wall. When there's a higher stake, they just have that next gear that Atlanta didn't seem to have against Dallas. They were able to expose Atlanta's flaws, etc. One thing that he pointed at was there's just one spawn on a hard point. I believe it was the first hard point of the series where Dallas were ahead on points and Atlanta was taking P4. And Dallas said, no, give them P4 entirely. Let's rotate to P5 now, right? And they completely shifted gear. And Ray even said you can even look at the mini-map and you see all of these arrows just completely avoiding P4 and moving right to P5, getting ready there because they knew that they were far enough ahead that so long as they didn't lose both hard points, they would win the round. And that kind of cohesion, maybe Atlanta just didn't expect that to happen from Dallas because they were definitely winning those strategic battles.
It's less that Atlanta didn't expect it and more that they just were not as cohesive of a team as Dallas was. Like, I'm glad you brought that up because the thing I was going to say is that I think Dallas proved themselves to be the smarter team in terms of their understanding of the game, especially in terms of like hardpoint rotations, to your point. But then also, like you saw in a lot of these matches, Atlanta for pretty lengthy stretches of time would be either like outslaying Dallas at certain points or like on S&D, how many times did a BZ open up with a first blood that then Atlanta was not able to capitalize on because and even when they had man advantage. So I think that's something also that's really pertinent to point out as to how Dallas managed to ended up dominating this finals as much as they did was that even when Atlanta did get these advantages, they did not seem to be nearly as coordinated as Dallas was. And Dallas were actually able to take back a lot of those like uneven matchups.
I'm happy that Ray won this championship as a coach. As you know, he had 2 World Championship finalist appearances with Envy, wasn't able to close it out there as a player, and now he's able to finally get one with the Envy brand and the Dallas Empire as a coach. And he was actually curious. I mean, he probably knew in the back of his head, but he was even saying that, I don't know if I'm going to get a ring. So I'm glad Krim said so.
Yeah.
I'm glad Krim did tell us off camera that he's pretty certain that Ray's going to get a ring, as the subs will also be receiving rings. So that's nice to hear. So Ray, you're getting your ring. That's great. Let's talk about a little bit about 4v4, but also the fact that, and this is one thing we did not bring up with Krim, we did report at ESPN Esports that the league will not be expanding. So that means that 20% of starting positions in the CDL for Season 2 will be completely eliminated. Those jobs will no longer exist, going from 5v5 to 4v4, 4 players per team starting, and 12 teams in the league. What do you think about what Season 2 will look like? Not even just CDL, but challengers, long-term players. What do you think will happen going into next season?
So, like I said, with the separate decisions kind of equaling one, like two separate decisions that make sense in the vacuum equaling one really terrible decision. I think the big thing that's going to happen is with challengers and the league itself, there was already, in my opinion, kind of a talent bottleneck, I guess, in terms of there were obviously a lot of people in challengers that were easily good enough to be on starting lineups. And there were also players that were benched that were good enough to be on starting lineups, like from league lineups. And now with fewer players and no expansion teams, that bottleneck is about to get a lot, like, you know, there's about to be more players stacked in that at that point. And I think the most frustrating thing for me, we'll see how teams handle it, you know, when we see who's going to get signed, and like this entire offseason is going to be an absolute bloodbath. But I think the big thing that's super frustrating to me is that what have we been talking about all year? We've been talking about how good some of these rookie players were that came onto rosters, right? Like it was actually more of there were way more success stories than failures in terms of rookies making their way up to teams because like a team is struggling, they grabbed a rookie player and they ended up working out really well. And that I'm wondering if teams are going to take chances on that now that there is going to be like so much more talent available and so much more like well-known or like named talent that you're already really familiar with. So we'll see how roster construction goes, but there's going to be a talent bottleneck in my opinion, and it's really frustrating given how many rookies we saw come onto teams and be so successful in the league, and how many teams seem to be willing to give rookie players a chance, even if they didn't have the name recognition.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting offseason and season 2. I've been spending a little bit of time actually just looking at the rosters, Emily, and just thinking like some of these rosters are really difficult.
Yeah.
Like to even think of, like, I do not envy the job of the GM right now of any of these teams.
No.
Trying to think, I guess I have to drop a player from my entire roster at some, I mean, not a conversation that we will necessarily have here right now, maybe for a future episode, but like, man, that is not an enviable task. Not whatsoever.
And and then having to, and like, I mean, I think the big thing is like, ideally you wouldn't have dropped anyone for some of these teams, right? Like Krim even said, like we would have kept the same roster. We would just run it back. Like,
yeah,
it's super tough to tell someone you're out of a job due to like not due to performance reasons, right? And not due to team chemistry reasons either. Just because we need to cut someone and it makes most sense to cut you. That's terrible. Like if I'm that, like I at least, like this sounds bad, but like I at least want it to be my performance. Like, you know, like tell me I don't have hands because that's something I can control and like I can feel like I'm in control of. I can be like, oh, okay, I'll just try to be better for the next team. Or if I'm terrible communicating, I'll just try to be a better communicator for my next team. But like in some of these cases, it really is going to be like you happen to be the odd person out because we have too many SMGs, or we already have a main AR, we don't need you, like that kind of thing. And it's just, it's frustrating.
Well, that'll do it for us here on Search and Destroy.
I feel like this always ends with just me being mad. I feel like every episode ends with me being mad. Just one episode. I wanted to end without me going on.
Maybe during the Treyarch era, who knows? It sounded, at least Krim said, that there was definitely something
already
more
better
communication.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which
is what exactly it makes everyone happy. So. But it's been a crazy season. I'm sure that this will not be it for our Call of Duty League coverage. I'm sure we're going to have a very wild off season. So keep it locked on our Twitter, ESPN_esports, for continued coverage at ESPN.com/esports as well. But that's it. That's all for us here on this episode. We will catch you next time.